Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Honours Night for the Alfred Precinct, which involves the Central Clinical School, the School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine, the Baker and the Burnet Institutes. I'm Steve Jane. I'm Dean of the Subfaculty of Translational Medicine and Public Health, and I'm going to give the initial blurb this evening. And of course, I will start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we all meet, the Boonwurrung and the Wurundjeri clans of the Kulin Nation, the custodians of the lands and waters, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and particularly to any Indigenous members who've joined us this evening. So, as I said, I have the pleasant duty of introducing all the participants tonight, and it's a group of four from Central Clinical School, from the School of Public Health, from Burnet and from Baker. And these four institutes are linked together by the cornerstone of it all, which is the Alfred Hospital, which is the centrepiece of the precinct on which we all work. So what we are interested in convincing you is that coming to the Alfred to do your honours year is an important decision because it's a precinct where your research really matters. And it matters because we think the distance between your research and patient outcomes is as small as it possibly can be. And the fact that the precinct is centred around the Alfred Hospital really underpins that research and patient care go hand in hand. That might be in the setting of population studies or epidemiology and health economics or occupational health and environmental health. It might relate to basic science or animal models, translational research, clinical trials, registries, biomarkers, drug discovery, devices. But I think you can all rest assured that research done on this precinct will influence patient care and outcomes in the shortest possible time, the true definition of translational research. Next slide, please. So, who are we? And I mentioned Monash University with the two schools here, the Central Clinical School and the School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine. The Burnet Institute, shown in the arrow there, is their own tower, and the Baker in next door in their own tower. And of course, the Alfred Hospital, which is the glue that brings us all together on the precinct. Next slide, please. There are a range of representatives here for you to talk to, the honours coordinators who speak to all of the potential places that you might do your honours. So Christoph Hagemeyer, Margaret Hibbs and Vilja are the CCS coordinators, and Darshini, Danny and Joanne are the School of Public Health Preventive Medicine coordinators. So they're the people who've got all the basic information for you that can explain all the ins and outs of applying and what an honours year would look like at the Alfred Precinct. Next slide, please. We love this precinct. It's in a magnificent location. It's very close to Albert Park Lake. It's incredibly close to Chapel Street with its vibrant coffee shops, nightlife, restaurants, Greville Street with its eclectic collection of fashion stores and record stores and so on. And we like to contrast what we offer as a precinct with what Clayton offers on the next slide. Yep, I'm not really sure why you'd want to go there, but each to his own. One thing that students worry about is leaving the mothership of Clayton, but I can tell you that the honours cohort at the Alfred Precinct is enormous. It's not as though you're going to be there with only one or two students. There's upwards of about 60 honours students annually across the entire precinct. So there's quite a vibrant social and interactive life, both scientific and enjoyment-wise. So you certainly can feel confident coming to the Alfred. You're going to have plenty of peers around to support and nurture you as far as your own research goes. Next slide, please. So what is it about the Alfred apart from the surrounds, the precinct? Well, it's a fantastic experience in terms of quality world-class research. The two Monash schools have budgets of around $140 million each, which is larger than every other faculty in the university apart from medicine. And that speaks to the quality of research and the success of these schools in terms of their grant income. Baker and Burnet, also tremendously well-known entities in their own right, with both national and international presence. And the quality of the people that you get to work with in these institutes is first class. These are people who are not only known Australia-wide, but internationally for the research they do. And it's research that makes a difference. And I think, again, I've highlighted to you, this is research that translates into outcomes for patients. It really is not far from the bench to the bedside. And that, for me, as a researcher, starting out was an incredibly important aspect of what I wanted to do. I wanted to make a difference, and I wanted to make a difference as quickly as I possibly could. And the people on the slides and many, many, many more others like them will give you the opportunity to achieve that. Next slide, please. So this, unfortunately, is slightly outdated. House used to be a great TV program on telly about a consultant in a US hospital that had a serious attitude problem. But translational research is, from my mind, defined as from mouse to house, or essentially from basic science or epidemiology or clinical trials into patient care. And this is a precinct that delivers that in spades. There's great research to be done at the Monash Clayton precinct, no question, excellent basic science, but that close link into patient outcomes and patient care is not there. And that's a unique experience, I think, that can be offered on this precinct. So we're keen to get you. We're keen to get you because we think we can offer you a wonderful experience. We think we can offer you collegiality and comradeship with your fellow honours students. We provide a number of scholarships for students, and there's the website to apply. So we certainly would like to see as many faces on the Alfred precinct next year as possible for your honours studies. Next slide, please. As I said, we hope very much to see you next year.
Thanks, Steve.
So I'd like to now introduce the host for the evening, who's Georgia Symons. And George will introduce the speakers for the night who are going to tell you compelling reasons why you should join us at the Alfred. Thanks, Georgia.
Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you to this Honours and Postgrad Information Night. Just give you some housekeeping for the evening. The first portion of the night will be this Zoom webinar where you'll hear from heads of schools and departments across the precinct to get to know the research topics and labs here. This session will run from 6 till 7:30 sharp, and I just want to note to everyone that this will close at 7:30. So if there's anything from the chat that you need to grab, just make sure you do that. We have this Q&A function available to all the participants. So if you have general questions about honours at Alfred throughout the webinar, please make use of that. We have a few assigned moderators to answer these questions. You're able to send these anonymously if you wish. And also you're able to interact with the questions, such as using an upvote to help identify popular questions. We've also provided the 2 emails of CCS and SPHPM. So if you have questions at a later date, feel free to send those through. The second portion of this evening will be the departmental Q&A sessions. So these will be, the departments are separated into individual Zoom meetings. So we sent this around earlier today and on Monday, but we'll repost these links in the chat function in case you can't find them. So please recopy them. As I said, this webinar will close at 7:30, so make sure you grab those before it closes. This will be a platform where you can ask verbal questions and type questions to researchers and enthusiastic academics in each of the department. And we encourage you to get involved in these and attend as many department Zooms as you can and as you'd like. If you aren't able to contact anyone at this time, please feel free to get in contact with them at a later date too. And we hope you enjoy tonight and all the diverse research that we have on offer here at Alfred. And thanks for joining. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, the head of Central Clinical School, Professor Terence O'Brien. Take it away, Terry.
Thanks, Georgia. I hope everyone can hear me. Thumbs up, Georgia, if you can't. Hi, my name's Terry O'Brien. As Georgia mentioned, I'm the head of the Central Clinical School, which is one of the 2 Monash University schools that is based on the Alfred precinct. But as I'll point out in a little bit, we extend well beyond the Alfred precinct to also involve Peninsula and Cabrini and Epworth, and there are some fantastic honours projects that are available at those sites as well. all of which have better cafes than Clayton. So certainly look at opportunities there. Next slide. So the two clinical school, Monash clinical schools that are focused on the Alfred site are the Central Clinical School, which is our school, and the School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine, headed by Sophia Zonkas. Between the two schools, we extend all the way from fundamental basic science, understanding mechanisms of disease, drug discovery, devices, biomarkers, preclinical imaging, through to at the other end of the translational spectrum, population studies, outcome studies, health services research, health economics. Central Clinical School focuses particularly on the left-hand side of this, which is the laboratory and clinical research, particularly around clinical trials, registries, and outcomes research. And the School of Public Health extends more to the right-hand side of the school, and you'll hear more from that from Dragan after my talk. But the point is that because we're embedded within in hospitals, and the Alfred is the hospital that specialises in treating patients that nobody else can. So it has patients with the most complex of medical problems across the sphere of adult medicine. And many of our scientists, researchers are also clinicians. We really see that our research is patient-driven and patient-focused, and many of the questions actually come from our clinical practice, identifying gaps in care in the patients we see, and then we bring it back to the laboratory and collaborate with our outstanding basic science researchers and identify, understand the diseases better from a fundamental basis and identify new ways of treating these conditions, test them in our preclinical laboratory studies, and then bring them through to clinical trials and ultimately changing outcomes for patients. So it is very patient focused. It doesn't matter whether you do a basic science or a clinical or a population based research. At the end of the day, the goals of the treatment the goals of the research is to improve human health and outcomes for patients. Next slide. Or am I in control? Georgia, I'm probably in control, and someone's in control anyhow. And in terms of the areas of medicine that we cover in the Central Clinical School, you name it. The Central Clinical School has research in just about every area of human health that you could think of. Neuroscience is my area. I'm a clinical neurologist as one of my many day jobs, along with being a neuroscience researcher and university administrator. We have women's health and women's mental health. We have anaesthesia, surgery, infectious diseases, which is a bit of a popular topic at the moment for some reason. Imaging, immunology, musculoskeletal disease, diabetes, cardiology, respiratory disease, gastroenterology, sexual health, allergy, and immunology, critical care. The Alfred has the largest intensive care in the country and is one of the world leaders in trials in intensive care medicine, regularly publishing in the New England Journal of Medicine. Same with anaesthesia. Hematology, trauma. Alfred is one of the designated 2 state neurotrauma centres, and increasingly important, ageing. And this is there's a good ageing research at the Alfred, but in particular at Peninsula, where Srikanth and his team are the leaders of the $35 million Centre for Healthy Ageing that is focused on the Peninsula campus. So we really cover the full spectrum of clinical medicine and in which you can do your research. Next slide. So this lists the 16 different departments that consist of the Central Clinical School, and many of these heads of departments on the this left-hand side of the slide will be talking about the research in their departments in the next parts of the evening. But each one of them are world-leading researchers in their own right, and underneath them they have tremendous teams of researchers. So you really get the opportunity, whatever your area of interest, of working with some of the world's leaders in translational research. And Steve mentioned this already, to be able to work alongside some of these pin-up men and women of translational research in Australia and in the world is a really unique opportunity to get to know them and to get immersed in their research, as well as be involved in some of the clinical opportunities that their departments offer. We have got more than 30 NHMRC investigator grant holders in the school. This is the pinnacle NHMRC grant for the grants for the absolute leaders in medical research in the country. There is no precinct that has more NHMRC grant holders than this. So we also, as well as giving you the opportunity to do clinical research, we also make sure we train you in rigorous research methods, which will hold you in good stead right through your career, no matter where you end up in biomedical research, or if you go into a clinical medicine field, or you go into something quite different. And we really try to aim for every student to get a publication out of their time in their honours program at the CCS. And Steve already mentioned, but just to refresh the faces, Christoph Hagemeyer, Margaret Hips, and Vilja Jovanotis are our three outstanding coordinators, so honours coordinators. So make sure you make yourself known to them at the end of the session and ask any questions you have about our program. And with that, I will hand over to Dragan Ilic from the School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine to talk about their offerings.
Many thanks, Terry, and thanks to Georgia and to Steve as well for the wonderful introduction. On behalf of Professor Severe Sungas, who is our head of school, I'd like to welcome you to this little talk that I'm going to give about our School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine. As has already been mentioned, excuse me, our school really focuses on the clinical, population health and applied side of research here at the Alfred Precinct. You know, we're really I guess, fortunate to be blessed with a number of not only national but international experts in their respective fields, not only from purely a clinical perspective, but also a research perspective, and also particularly those that combine a clinical research career. So for those of you who maybe are currently in the MD, you know, I'd highly encourage you to have a chat to us about that. As I mentioned, we're really proud of our history. Professor John McNeill really sort of laid the foundations for our school as head of school for over 30 years. And that's been passed on now to Professor Zungas, who's just leading the charge on a number of fronts. As I mentioned, we're really proud of all of our staff, particularly the way not only that they contribute to research, but I guess translate that research as has been a common theme. And I don't have to look any further to our current situation with COVID. If I look towards our adjunct staff, the current Chief Health Officer is an adjunct with us, and the former Deputy Chief Health Officer, Professor Alan Chung, is a current staff member, and just I guess a quick and relevant example of how our research is affecting and making a difference, not only from a clinical point of view, a population point of view, but also a policy perspective as well. Here we go. So as has already been mentioned, we're also on the other side of the Alfred precinct. So we're on the St Kilda Road side. We're really thankful to have a very vibrant honours program within our school. We've got the 3 cohorts doing their honours from the BMed Sci program in medicine, the Bachelor of Biomedical Sciences, as well as the Bachelor of Health Sciences and Bachelor of Public Health program. We're based, like I said, at 553 St Kilda Road. So we've got a lovely cafe on the ground floor for any of you who have a coffee intake that requires frequent uptake. But we also have a couple of satellite sites as well. So over at the Monash Clayton precinct, the Monash Centre for Health and the Monash Centre for Health and Monash Centre for Health Research Implementation. They do a lot of reproductive research over at Monash, but MICRI, the Monash Centre for Health Research Implementation, led by Professor Helena Teed, who's again got both a national and international profile, and the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine, where we have our Department of Forensic Medicine headed up by Professor Richard Bassett. So a number of opportunities, I guess, to be placed, whether it be at the Alfred or our satellite offices. As has already been mentioned, we're quite a large group. Focusing just on the School of Public Health, we have over 1,000 employees. We occupy the first 5 floors of this lovely building. Have a great research income, both NHMRC as well as ARC, and then a variety of other discipline-specific programs such as diabetes and philanthropic organisations and industry granting bodies. I might be biased here, but I'd like to think that we're probably the number 1 School of Public Health, certainly in Australia and I would argue Asia. And I think a lot of our research that we produce across a variety of journals, from New England to BMJ to Lancet, etc., make a high impact and translate accordingly. So what can you expect if you come to the School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine? So a smorgasbord, as they say. Obviously, we're very strong across the various disciplines, but we also obviously have a very, very strong emphasis on a variety of research platforms. So this takes into account clinical trials, methodologies around study design, biostatistics and data science, data analytics, which is an emerging field that we're seeing. But then, like I said, across a variety of public health and population and preventative areas, ranging from health promotion, global health, and health policy as well. So I'm not going to go into too much detail because my colleague Ayton is going to talk about the relevant divisions in much more detail, but I thought I'd just highlight the breadth of disciplines and platforms that we have. Our flagship trial is the Esprit study, over $50 million, set up many years ago by Professor McNeil, looking at the impact of aspirin in the elderly, whether or not it increases survival, does it prevent heart attacks, strokes, and since then it's really spawned a number of different sub-studies across a variety of areas, depression, cancer, genomics, etc. So really a great opportunity to engage in one of the largest clinical trials in the world. We've got a strong cancer emphasis headed up by Professor John Salzberg. As you could imagine, being a School of Public Health, we have a fantastic division in clinical epidemiology, infectious diseases led by Karen Leader, I mentioned Alan Cheng, cardiovascular research, musculoskeletal research led by Professor Flavia Ciccatini. So a really wide area in terms of clinical epidemiology. So not only, I know a lot of times people, when they hear about epidemiology, they think it's just stats and methods, but the clinical epidemiology arm is really translating that into practice and policy. As you could imagine, an extremely strong Research Methodology Division. Professor Andrew Forbes heads up our data sciences and analytics platforms, and we're very blessed to have Cochrane Australia, led by Professor Sally Green, also positioned within our school. Health Services, again, another flagship of our school, headed up by Professor Susanna Ahern. One of the aspects that the school is known internationally for, really, is our registry science. So the creation of a variety of registries. I think there's probably not a clinical discipline that you could list that we don't have a registry already designed for, whether it be cancer registries, surgical registries, a whole variety that we truly lead the way in. Occupational and environmental health, currently led by Professor Michael Abramson. The Hazelwood study, looking at the effect of the fires down in Gippsland a few years ago, again has been, or was commissioned by the Victorian government. So as you can see, that real connection between government policy and seeing what we can do in order to translate findings into the population. One of the areas that we're extremely proud of is the critical care research, and it's just a great example of the nexus between research at our school and the Alfred Hospital itself, led by Professor Jamie Cooper and Professor Carol Hodgson. ANZIC's RC is really sort of leading the way in critical care and intensive care research, all the way from pre-hospital, emergency and trauma research. Our social sciences, led by Professor Jane Fisher. So again, one of our notable research staff who does a lot of media work. So if any of you listen to the ABC and Raf Epstein, she's a regular contributor there. A variety of others, I won't go into too much detail. As is mentioned, if you can think of the discipline, we've got it. Medical and health professions education, as well as our two satellites. So we've got a whole centre on research and implementation, led by Professor Helena Teed over at the Clayton site. And for all things forensic medicine, led by Professor Richard Bassett over at the Department of Forensic Medicine, which is very much aligned with the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine. So hopefully the next slide will appear shortly, and I'm just going to leave you with this one. It's a short 1-minute video, just highlighting, I guess, the various careers that are open to you once you do complete your honours with us at the School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine.
Imagine a world without public health. We would not know how to prevent disease, promote health and well-being, or how to build and maintain efficient healthcare systems. Our health is determined by our physical environment, social and economic factors, or genetic and behavioural factors, all of which form part of public health. Public health experts strive to protect health and well-being at a community level. With global pandemics such as COVID-19, we're now more reliant on them than ever before. A public health degree from Monash allows you to focus on a range of areas, paving the way for a career that will make change. Our graduates are right now making a difference across many important industries, such as in the public sector, developing health policy and public health programs; academia, leading the way for future generations; international aid, promoting healthcare in resource-poor settings; healthcare, offering support and guidance; industry, providing communities with much-needed access to healthcare services; and research, discovering information which impacts clinical practice, policy, and the community. There's never been a better time to start a career in public health.
So, Benny, thanks for your time. Hope you enjoyed that presentation, and look forward to chatting with you in the Zoom session post 7:30. I'm going to hand over now to Alexandra Dvorscek, and Alex will be talking about student experiences at CCS.
Great, thanks for that, Dragan. So, as introduced, my name's Dvorscek. I'm a current PhD student at the Central Clinical School, and I'm here to talk to you tonight about the honours experience. So a little bit about me. I did a double degree at Monash in biomed and science, majoring in immunology and genetics and molecular biology. And in my last semester of my undergrad, I was trying to work out what path to go down and if research was for me. And to help me work this out, I did an M3990 unit in the Jacobson laboratory, which is a B-cell lab. And this really helped me fall in love with immunology and in B cells in particular. But by this point of my education, I really wanted to get out of Clayton. So I came and looked at the ARA to see what projects were offered out here. And so I did my honours out here in the Tarlinton laboratory, which is an immune memory lab under the supervision of Professor David Tarlinton and Dr. Isaac Quast. And now I'm currently doing my PhD in the same lab with the same supervisors looking at the same project. So what is honours? If I had to break it down, it's made up of a research project component and a coursework component. The research project makes up around 75% of your marks, and it's really exciting because what you're doing is original research. Not all projects are lab-based, mine was, and basically what this involves is performing experiments over the year, which will help answer a defined set of research questions that you and your supervisors come up with. Then at the end of the year, presenting this data in a seminar and as a thesis. And it's really a whole new university experience where you're very independent, can be super hard work, but also really, really rewarding. So probably the most important bit of information I can give you guys tonight is about choosing your project. What I'd advise is meet with potential supervisors based on your interests and the projects that are offered. So go through the booklets and make yourself a shortlist. And then when you meet with potential supervisors, ask about the lab work and make sure that it's something that you could spend the year doing from a practical standpoint. I'd also encourage that you make sure you and your supervisor are on the same page in terms of the hours you'll be expected to work, the workload, how you'll communicate. And if you can, it's really nice and interesting to hear about past and present students from the labs and their experiences. Misconceptions about honours. A big one is that you'll be left on your own. This is absolutely not the case. Your supervisor will help you learn everything you need to know, and everyone around you is also really helpful and supportive. You won't be expected to know everything. You'll learn everything from square one, whether that comes from the theory or also the lab work. And another one is that honours will take over your life. Again, that is not the case. If you're organised, you can have a really great work-life balance. Next slide, please. So the honours of the Alfred Research Alliance, I think it's been spoken to very highly tonight, but it's a highly collaborative place to be. We've got the hospital a few doors down. There are plenty of opportunities here. We have a really nice mixture of staff and students within the precinct. It's a great culture and it opens up a lot of opportunities for the future. So thank you for listening. On the next slide, I've included my email. I'm really happy for anyone to email me with any questions about honours generally. And now I'm going to pass over to Georgina Lau from the School of Public Health and Preventative Medicine. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Georgina and I'm a current PhD student with the School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine. So just for a little bit of context, I also came from a Bachelor of Biomedical Science at Monash and then went on to do my honours with the Pre-Hospital Emergency and Trauma Research Group, where I then stayed to do my PhD. So for my research, I'm not lab-based at all. So I mostly look at data from the hospital and from patient interviews to try and understand how alcohol and drug use is a risk factor for injury. So an honours year is essentially a year of research after your degree. And it's a great opportunity for you to actually take a project and use it to learn how to do research with the support of a supervisor. And I really strongly believe that it is up to you what you want to get out of your honours year. So for me personally, I never really expected to end up in public health research out of a biomedical science degree, but had really enjoyed the bit of it that I had done and wanted to see if it was something that I could see myself doing in the longer term. And that said, I would like to make it really clear that an honours year is not just for people who want to do a PhD or end up in research. So a lot of people from my honours cohort actually ended up going straight into full-time work, both in jobs in research, as well as in jobs in government and industry. A number of students also used it as a pathway to help them get into further postgraduate study for things like medicine and physio. So especially here at the Alfred Research Alliance, it's a really great opportunity for you to ease yourself into a more professional environment and to work alongside people working in research and healthcare. It's also a really great opportunity for you to develop some of those soft skills like communication and project management that will follow you wherever you go. So when it comes to choosing your project, I think it's really important to start early and don't be afraid to shop around a little bit. I think it's really important to take the time and effort to actually meet with a couple of potential supervisors and discuss different projects, to really try and get a feel for how that particular supervisor works. So keep in mind that every supervisor will have a slightly different way of working, and that won't necessarily suit what you want to get from your supervisor. So really take the time to see if how they work is compatible with how you like to work. I mean, you'll hear it time and time again, but pick a topic that you're interested in. I think it really does come across in your presentations and in your writing when you're interested in the project. And it does help to make the year just that little bit more enjoyable for you. So on the next slide, I have my contact details. Please feel free to reach out if you have any more questions or if you'd like to have a bit more of a chat. But for now, I'll pass you on to Dr. Darshini Ayton, who is one of the wonderful honours coordinators at the School of Public Health.
Thanks so much, Georgina. So yes, I am Darsh Ayton and here to chat to you a little bit more about some of the projects that are on offer. Actually, can you do next slide, please? Cool. So take a photo of this page because this are all the divisions of our school. And so as you can see, we've got acute and critical care, which is Professor Jamie Cooper and Professor Erica Wood, chronic disease and aging, so Professor Susan Davis and Professor Sophia Zungas, forensic medicine, Associate Professor Richard Bassard and Professor Noel Woodford, general practice, Danielle Matzer, health systems, services and policy, Professor Alex Colley and Helena Teed, and planetary health, Jane Fisher and Professor Karen Leader. So take a photo, you can Google and stalk these people to see the type of work that they do. Next slide. But they're the kind of topic areas or divisions that we're looking at, but everything we do is underpinned by amazing methods. And so you come to our school and you're experiencing all these different divisions of methods that are at your fingertips. So we've got biostatistics, data analytics, modeling, and health economics by Professor Andrew Forbes and Danny Liu, clinical and health data outcomes, innovation and research, Professor Susanna Ahern and Professor Belinda Gabay, clinical trials and cohort studies, Professor Michael Abramson and Professor Carol Hodgson, evidence synthesis, qualitative and implementation methods, Professor Sally Green and Professor Helen Skateris, and teaching and learning, Professor Dragan, Ilic, and Associate Professor Barsha Duke. These are the types of methods applied. So you can see that we can do randomized controlled trials, which are amazing and brilliant, and a lot of honours projects are embedded within some bigger RCTs. We can do observational methods, patient experiences, but also implementation research. And so if you don't know what implementation research is, Google it. There's so much that we can do in this space, guidelines, health policy, and then you've heard from Dragan, information around epi, biostats, big data, but also qualitative research, mixed methods, systematic reviews, and health economics. So there's a type of method that would suit anyone and everyone, and there's an opportunity to play across these different methodological approaches. Next slide. So just to give you, I guess, a little bit of insights into the type of projects that you might be doing. So you heard mention of STARI clinical trial, and that's over 10,000 people in a randomized controlled trial looking at the effects of statins on health outcomes. And so you can look at information around health outcomes, lifestyles, and quality of life. And there's further contact details from Andrea Curtis if you're interested in any projects associated with STARI. Next slide. Aspirin you heard about as well, one of the largest clinical trials looking at aspirin and 16,000 people in the US and Australia. And these are some examples of projects. So the impact of social isolation and loneliness, how physical activity can modify health outcomes, dementia risk prediction, and epigenetic biomarkers. Next slide. Examples of honours projects for critical care research. And so you can see things around emergency hospital admissions for critical bleeding, drug and alcohol use in non-traffic trauma deaths, nutrition during critical illnesses. So again, variety. Next slide. And then perioperative medicine, looking at improving outcomes for patients having major surgery. So in particular, if you're interested in doing medicine, some of these projects will really give you insight into some of these areas. So chewing gum to treat nausea and vomiting is an example of one of the honours projects that have been done. And then, as Dragan said, we have so many clinical registries. Think of a health issue or a topic, and we probably have a registry related to it, including the breast device registry, pelvic mesh. Some of these have direct policy implications and practice implications, the dementia registry, and so worth checking out our registry profile on our webpage. Cancer research just came from a meeting with some of these guys looking at pro-patient online platforms for quality of life for people with pancreatic cancer and upper GI cancer. And so, yeah, looking at technology, but also quality of life and symptom burden. And these are the contact details for these guys. Next slide. Cardiovascular disease, and again, really diverse projects here, right from biomarkers all the way to health economic assessment. Musculoskeletal unit, again, diversity. I think that's like the catch cry of our school, but looking at obesity and physical inactivity, but then also lower back pain and also joint replacement. So lots of different projects that you could get involved in there. Global and women's health, and I think one of the strengths of this group is that they're doing research that's both local and international. And I know we're all keen to travel again, but there's ways of doing research looking at these different topics. So intimate partner violence during pregnancy in Vanuatu, attitudes of young Sri Lankans in Australia towards mental health and accessing mental health care are some examples. We've heard quite a bit from the Monash Centre of Health Research and Implementation, but just to flag that they're doing quite a bit in COVID-19 behavioural research and trying to understand, for example, things like vaccine uptakes and some of the behaviours that are driving the need to get tested. Climate change has been in the news heaps, and so looking at the impacts of climate change, but also links between air pollution and autism, wind farms, mobile phones, big firefighters study, and also asbestos and cement workers. The insurance work and health group have also been in the media quite a bit. They had a recent study that was looking at truck drivers' health and well-being, and on this slide you can see a few of their other projects. And then again, some more methods approaches, so biostats, Cochrane, and health economics, and so knowledge translation for stroke living guidelines, tuberculosis reactivation rates following exposure, some pretty interesting projects in that field as well. And our final unit is Health and Social Care Unit. This is one of our new units in the school, and we work very closely with industry partners across health and social care to do projects across the lifespan. And just to flag, one of our honours students from a few years ago has just published her third paper from her project, so lots of publications coming out for her. Next slide. But you can check out more of our student research projects at our webpage, and we've got snapshots of projects as well as our honours booklet, so please get in touch. And now I'm going to hand over to Professor David Curtis, who is from the Australian Centre for Blood Diseases.
Thanks very much, Jayashri. Hopefully you can all hear me. So I'm a clinical haematologist, and I'm director of the blood cancer research at the ACBD, or Australian Centre for Blood Diseases. And that's actually the largest haematology translational research department in Australia. So I'm sure many of you have had a family member or a friend that has been affected by a blood disease. For instance, multiple myeloma, a devastating cancer of plasma cells, acute leukemia or polycythemia, diseases of hematopoietic stem cells, or even solid cancers, which are now often treated by new immune therapies. And I'm sure you know somebody who's had a blood clot, which is particularly topical at the moment with COVID vaccinations. So these are some of the blood diseases that we study at the ACBD by 14 of our research groups, which include 6 clinical scientists and almost 30 postgraduate students. Next slide, thanks. So the ACBD really offers a very vibrant environment for postgraduate students, where there's really a very strong focus on direct links to our patients. Particular strengths include in vivo animal models of both blood cancers and blood clotting, access to human samples from early phase clinical trials, such as the BCL2 inhibitors, venetoclax, which is a Melbourne-based invention, and state-of-the-art technologies in genomics, nanoparticles, and live cell imaging. We've got a proven track record, and students have often been co-authors on very high-impact papers in New England Journal of Medicine, Science, Cell, Stem Cell. And we've really got some very strong links with other departments on the precinct, which enables sort of multidisciplinary studies, which are particularly good for honours projects. But probably most of all, I think we understand and value the importance of rigorous scientific discussion through joint lab meetings, sharing of resources and expertise, and that's to ensure a really valuable and enjoyable student experience. So if you're interested in some of these blood diseases that I've spoken about, I strongly encourage you to speak to the relevant lab heads tonight or contact them via their email to find out more about the student experience at the ACVD. So now I will turn over to Helmut from Neurosciences. Thanks, Helmut.
Thanks, David. So I'm Helmut Butzkueven. I'm a neurologist and head of the Department of Neuroscience in the Central Clinical School. So our Department of Neuroscience, although it's relatively new, only 3 years old, is really part of an overarching Monash strategy to build a department or a center of excellence in the Alfred Monash precinct for neuroscience. And the reason for that is that neuroscience is really the last great mystery, perhaps together with immunology, the two last great mysteries of medicine. Everything else that you're going to hear about today is exciting, but it's largely worked out. Whereas in neuroscience, we're really struggling with the brain, its function in health, its function in disease, and then many diseases that you see listed here, which of course affect ultimately probably the majority of humans, so things from epilepsy to MS, stroke, migraine headaches affecting about 8% of the population very significantly, and of course trauma. I don't want to mention a huge list, but you can see that the cumulative impact of these diseases and how to manage them better and improve care, improve outcomes is a significant, huge mission that we are very privileged to be part of. We have a huge number of projects available. We have, I think, a really wonderful infrastructure for honor students. We had, I think, around 20 honor students last year in the department. We have a really wonderful, able mentor and coordinator, Vilja Jokubaitis, who will be, I think, in the chat room for neuroscience later. And projects really range, from animal work to translational work to human studies of all kinds. And I really invite you to look at the projects, and also if you're interested in neuroscience, come across to the chat room later. We really pride ourselves in taking care of our students, and as well as the honor students, we also have currently around 40 PhD students in the department, as well as a lot of young postdocs and other really exciting thought leaders that are really forging ahead with scientific discovery. I think I've said this already. Our philosophy is to be engaging, to be collaborative, and most of all, value the contribution of everyone in our mission to really make a difference for ultimately for neurological diseases. So thank you for your attention. I look forward to seeing some of you in the Zoom chat later, and I'll hand over to Brian Drew from the Baker.
Okay, thanks very much. So my name is Associate Professor Brian Drew. I'm a program lead and laboratory head at the Baker Heart and Diabetes Institute. I also co-chair the Research Training and Education Committee there. which oversees the majority of the academic and professional activities for students. So for those of you who haven't heard about the Baker Institute, we're an independent medical research institute based at the Alfred Hospital site next to the Central Clinical School and most of the other places that are talking today. And we have a 90-year history of research in Melbourne. So we've been doing this for quite a long time. And in fact, we've had over 50-year long-standing collaboration with Monash University. We're a reasonably small institute. We focus on cardiovascular disease and diabetes, which are two of the main killers in Australia. We have about 30 individual research groups, which creates quite a nice boutique research environment, which has sort of a nice social neighbourly feel within the institute. So why do research at the Baker? We have tons of internationally recognised researchers as supervisors. We publish between 400 and 500 papers a year in our fields, and we have many, many state-of-the-art facilities and technologies which are there to support your research and for us to perform cutting-edge projects at our institute. Some other advantages at the Baker are that there's several funding opportunities. We have scholarship top-ups and professional development courses. We have a student body of about 65 students each year, and we also have a student committee which organises professional and social engagement. So the projects that are on offer at the Baker this time around are for both honours and PhD projects, and they really are around the fundamentals and the discovery side of a lot of the work that goes on at the Institute. We're looking at novel biomarkers in the blood that can be used for diagnostics and prognostics, but also looking at cell signalling pathways that lead to these diseases. And of course, this utilises a lot of our cutting-edge platforms. So if this sounds of interest to you, please check out our breakout room afterwards, or go to our website, as you can see at the bottom of this slide. Thanks very much for listening. Hope you don't have too much information overload, but I'll hand over next to Professor Beeson from the Burnet Institute.
Burnet has a number of interesting and important projects for students next year. Our health research is organised into 4 major programs. That's maternal, child and adolescent health, infectious disease elimination, which is focused mainly on viral hepatitis, malaria, HIV and COVID-19, behaviours and health risks, which focus on a number of areas including alcohol and drugs, mental health and sexual and reproductive health, and health security and pandemics, which is focused mainly on major health issues in our region, including tuberculosis, antimicrobial resistance, and COVID-19 and other major health issues. Our work is organised into 3 broad areas of expertise, which we call our disciplines. That's life sciences or biomedical science, public health and international development. We have a strong global focus and have international programs in Myanmar and the Mekong region, in Papua New Guinea and the Pacific, and projects in a number of other regions, including Africa and other parts of Asia. But being a student at Burnet involves being in an environment of excellence in biomedical, public health and international research. There are opportunities across a diverse range of health issues and employing a range of different research skills. You'll get experience in research that is translated into clinical practice and public health programs and policy, or into the development of new health products and tools, and undertake research that's globally relevant. We have a strong culture of education and career development, and there are a wide range of opportunities and supports for students. So please refer to the student handbook and our website for more information. Thanks.
Next, we have the head of the Department of Diabetes, Professor Mark Cooper.
My name is Mark Cooper, and I'm the head of the Department of Diabetes. As you would all be aware, diabetes is a very common condition and is arguably the major global epidemic of this century. So the Department of Diabetes is the only university department in Australia which is solely dedicated to diabetes research, and we focus primarily on type 1 and type 2 diabetes and its complications, which include kidney disease, eye disease and heart disease. Our department focuses on research in the area of diabetes, is also involved in education, is developing innovative new treatments to reduce the development of diabetes and to prevent its complications. And we collaborate worldwide with the leading research groups in this field. So in our area of research, we focus on diabetic kidney disease and atherosclerosis. We discovered more than 15 years ago the receptor ACE2, which has turned out to be the important binding site for the COVID-19 virus. Interestingly, diabetics have at least a twofold increased risk of mortality from COVID, and this has become a very exciting area of research, probably because ACE2, which is increased in this condition, is taking up more virus. Our research ranges from molecular biology, epigenetics, physiology and biochemistry, and we're looking at disease models, and we do both clinical and basic research. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, I'd like to introduce Professor David Tarlinton. He's the head of Department of Immunology and Pathology. Take it away, David.
Good evening. Thank you all for joining with us for this information session. You may be wondering why there is a Department of Immunology in such a clinical context. And I think if you just read through with me what's on this slide, you'll see, I think, the underpinning of the philosophy of our department, which positions us so well in this context. So the immune system is often considered to be extraordinarily complex, which it is, but it's comprised of a number of individual cell types that cooperate together and communicate together to initiate immune responses in regard to or in relation to challenges that may occur. So those can be perturbations in tissue, they can be infections, or they can be the development of cancers, for example. So the system is able to recognize these changes and to hopefully trigger a response that's proportionate and appropriate for that challenge and reduce that back to a homeostasis. So those involve mechanisms of activation of cells, communication between cells, the responses of cells, and then the return to normal settings. Now, that's typically revolving around disease identification, development, and resolution, and which is why it's so beneficial for us to be where we are. So immunology is not only the study of the immune system itself, but it's also the application of those processes to the identification and therapy of a number of diseases. So if I could go on to the next slide. So these are the laboratories that are engaged in research in our department, and I'd encourage you to take a screenshot of this. The areas in which they study, the individual study is listed next to them. But I'd highlight, if I could, that we're engaged in the process of basic science, like understanding the mechanisms of activations of cells and systems, the consequences of that activation in terms of resolution of disease and prevention of disease and or in the diagnosis of disease, and also translating and utilizing that information for disease prevention into the future. So there's an entire range of activities that can be conducted, or that are being conducted in our research using the immune system for this purpose. So thank you very much. I'll hand over to Joseph Doyle.
Good evening. My name is Joe Doyle. I'm an infectious diseases physician and group leader in the Department of Infectious Diseases. I wanted to give you a brief overview of our large and growing department here at the Alfred and Monash University. The Infectious Diseases Department has more than 120 staff, but only about a quarter of them are infectious disease doctors. We have a wide range of nurses, pharmacists, epidemiologists, laboratory scientists, and other researchers and service providers. Alfred ID provides a very large hospital-based service of both specialised ID and subspecialised, including areas like HIV, intensive care, immunocompromised hosts, and growing ambulatory care. So you can see on this slide that there are a number of services within our department, and they all cut across between clinical infectious diseases, microbiology services, and in the last year, particularly in the COVID epidemic in Australia, we have had a growing number and role in infection prevention in the hospital and in our community. There are many research opportunities across all of our service streams. This slide gives you a sense of them. Our HIV area has been one of our traditional focuses. It's one of the largest services in Australia, the statewide HIV service. And we also have an emerging and growing number of areas, particularly around influenza, antimicrobial resistance, immunocompromised hosts, viral hepatitis, and surgical site infections. But there are many themes of research we perform across clinical trials, surveillance and epidemiology, laboratory science, and infection prevention and the connections with vaccine development. So I'd encourage any of you to look at the handbook and see if there are any projects that might interest you and reach out to potential supervisors. Thanks very much, and I hope I will see some of you next year.
I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Professor Jayashri Kulkarni, the Head of Department of Psychiatry.
Good evening, everybody. If you really want to make your mark in the medical research world, come and do psychiatry. We're desperate for new treatments, for new understandings, and for new developments. Psychiatry is really critical in terms of the quality of life that people can experience. And while we've got to the point where people are living longer, they're more mobile, we've got to make sure that people can live better and have a good quality of life as well. So at the Monash Alfred Psychiatry Research Centre and the Department of Psychiatry, Monash University, we are doing several different projects. In the Alfred campus, we have focused on women's mental health, and there are a number of projects which look at the impact of trauma in early life on emotion regulation and the development of what was called borderline personality disorder. We prefer to call it complex PTSD. We also look at things such as the hormones and the mind, building on the studies that we've done over years using hormones as a treatment for many mental illnesses in women. We're now looking at the impact of it in terms of cognition and behaviour across the menstrual cycle and in other areas. We're looking at menopause and depression, and particularly looking at early life stress in this particular age group, but then also the proper treatments moving forward. There's a whole section of research which is looking at body image and related disorders, and in particular using AI, artificial intelligence, in a particular chatbot called KIT, and the impacts of talking to KIT about body image. And we found that a number of 14 to 18-year-olds are very interested in doing this sort of work. We have a specific interest in addiction. And of course, as the street drug use increases, and also in particular with COVID, the alcohol substance use has really escalated. We know that there are a number of people we're going to have to provide new treatments and interventions for. So addiction psychiatry is another particular area. So that's going on in the Alfred campus. And the next slide, please. Our other site is at the Epworth site, and this is the Epworth Psychiatry Group in Camberwell, and this is a particular area of expertise in brain stimulation. So a whole heap of projects that are looking at neural excitation and inhibition and mental illness, looking at EEGs and biomarker prediction of mental ill health, looking at the detection of peak brainwave frequencies for use in brain stimulation, i.e. how to get the best site and the actual, the intensity of stimulation to produce the best results. Then also developing novel therapeutics for cognitive disorders. So again, the problems of thinking. We are what we think, we are what we behave, we are what we feel. And so these are critical areas to actually improve and enhance in areas or diseases such as Alzheimer's and mild cognitive impairment, as well as traumatic brain injury. I think that might be the end of my slides. I urge you to come along and have a further chat about the projects, but really the way forward for our society is through the mental health of our population. Come and help us improve it. I'm now pleased to introduce Associate Professor Jason Ong, who's going to talk about the projects from the Melbourne Sexual Health Centre. Thank you for your attention.
Hi everyone, good evening. So I'm Jason. I'm a sexual health physician based at Melbourne Sexual Health Centre. So I'm pleased to share with you some of the projects that we have going on here. So we are actually a clinical site. So Melbourne Sexual Health Centre is based in Carlton, and we are a very kind of busy clinical service, seeing 50 to 60,000 consultations a year. We have about 100 staff, and a proportion of that staff also focus on research. So we publish about 120 papers a year, just from the one centre. And if you're interested in our research, if you want to join us, what you'll get from us is a project with existing data. So because we see so many patients coming through with sexual health and HIV, we have a lot of clinical data available to be analyzed. Often we will already have ethics, so you don't have to bother with the tediousness of going through all of that. And many of our students actually end up with a first author publication, obviously subject to your contributions, but it's a high likelihood that you will get one of those. And we also have a really great supervisory team as well. And all of us are very friendly and available to chat with you anytime. So on the next slide, it's just a few of our recent students, and just to show you the types of publications that resulted. For example, at the very top, this is one of my students that did a global systematic review and was published in quite a good journal in AIDS, looking at HIV, but you can also see that we also do other things more clinical, so thinking about genital examinations for female sex workers, as well as more epidemiological. So if you want to gain those skills, that's related to herpes there. And then one of my other students a few years ago, he actually ended up with 4 publications in his year. So he was a very productive student. But anything to do with HIV and sexual health, we'll be very happy to chat with you in our Zoom meeting later. Thank you. So I'll now pass the time to Professor James Lee.
Thank you for the introduction, Jason. So I'm James Lee. I'm representing the Department of Surgery from Central Clinical School. I'm a general and endocrine surgeon. Thank you. The next slide, please. So the Department of Surgery has many surgical disciplines, and as clinicians and surgeons ourselves, we tend to do clinical research as well as translational research. We do have some departments that engage in basic science research, but that is less in our department. So in general surgery, we also divide into upper GI or esophageal, gastric, and bariatric surgery. There's a large bariatric registry from which a lot of research papers are being published, and we take students to do those projects as well. There's the Department of HPB, colorectal surgery, breast surgery, and I'm from the endocrine surgery department. I will spend the next minute talk a little bit more about the research that the endocrine surgeons do, but I would just want to mention that the other departments include cardiothoracics, orthopedics, plastics and reconstructive surgery, burns, which has a large research profile on campus, vascular surgery, neurosurgery, ENT surgery, and urology. Next slide, please. So in terms of endocrine surgery research, we focus our research projects on personalizing thyroid cancer treatment, and we have 4 arms to our research endeavors. So the biggest arm by far is the clinical research arm, and we've got a large database from the Monash University Endocrine Surgery Unit, over 4,000 patients within that database, and we publish a lot of papers based on those patients. We also engage in translational research. We have collaborations with Peter Mac and the Monash Health Molecular Genetics Unit, and also the Hudson Institute. We more recently started collaborating with the ANZ Thyroid Cancer Registry to produce patient-reported outcomes research, and also our newest arm in artificial intelligence and machine learning. We have a postdoctoral scientist working with us, and we also have collaborations with the Department of Data Science and Artificial Intelligence at the Melbourne University campus. So if any of this is of interest to you, please come and join me in the chat room later on. And if you want to know the contact person for any of the other surgical disciplines, I will please have a chat to me and I will get you onto the right person. Thank you. And I would now like to introduce the next speaker, Professor Alex Butzkueven.
Thanks, James, and welcome everybody. My name's Alex Basutis, and I'm arguably one of the happiest people to be here because I'm in charge of probably the most important unit, which is gastroenterology. And that's because at this time of night, it involves organs. Can I have the next slide, please? The organs of the body that are fundamentally important to those of you that are hungry and wanting dinner, and that is food. We have a very diverse group of gastroenterologists, hepatologists, nurses, pharmacists, scientists, dietitians or nutritionists, and psychologists dealing with a very diverse and complex group of patients. Most of the research projects that we have a clinical focus, but that doesn't discount basic science. And I'll just go through this slide. My particular area of interest is GI cancer, and I'm particularly interested in what makes cancer grow from pre-malignant to malignant conditions, particularly with genetics in high-risk people that have inherited gene mutations that actually put them at high risk. And my particular lab has basic science projects that have models of care, and they are either in vitro or animal based, particularly in luminal type cancer. But across the board, we have a breadth of disciplines that are on offer within gastroenterology, and hepatology is one of the historical favourites within gastroenterology at the Alfred, mainly because of hepatoma research that is now one of the most fast-growing epidemiologically cancers in the world at the moment. Of course, we're quite famous within the Monash space because of the FODMAP diet and FODMAP app that has actually been created through our researchers, and that's with Peter Gibson leading that. But we also have good interventional type research within endoscopy. So there's a diagram there that shows what we can do with polyp resections and early tumour resections as well. And this has very strong research outputs within our unit as well. And then finally, one of the things that you've been hearing a lot about has been immunology. There's been at least three or four presentations before this that have mentioned immunology, and gastroenterology is no different in that matter. And the nexus of immunology and bowel disorders is inflammatory bowel disease. And so we have a number of clinical trials that are on offer, but also some of the epidemiological aspects of all these conditions are also on offer. So they're the sort of gamut of different research projects. I'm happy to be contacted and put you in touch with the various heads of each of the departments that work under me that can help in this space. And this is just a look at some of the publications that have actually come from our unit. These are particularly GI oncological ones. And I would say that most of our students have actually played a major role in these sorts of papers. So thank you. And I'll pass on to Paul Lawton, who's the Director of Renal Medicine.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I come to you from Gurindji country, and here to talk about the Department of Renal Medicine at the Alfred and what we do in the research space. The Alfred Department of Renal Medicine offers a great opportunity to do clinical research. We have a broad experience, particularly in dialysis, particularly home dialysis, the largest home dialysis program in the state. We do about 30 kidney transplants each year. And what's particularly important at the Alfred Department of Renal Medicine is the experience we get at the complex end of immunology and transplant immunology with dual organ transplants. Because of course, there are not only kidney transplants done at the Alfred, but also heart and lung transplants, as well as bone marrow transplants as non-solid organ transplantation. And that brings me to the areas where we have particular interest and expertise in the specialised or subspecialised space in nephrology and the many clinical research opportunities that brings in the areas of acute kidney injury, particularly after trauma and cardiothoracic surgery. The monoclonal gammopathies of renal significance, so those associated with the many different gammopathies of that are related to bone marrow disorders. We've heard previously about the importance of HIV medicine at the Alfred network and through the Central Clinical School. Nephrology is important in HIV medicine. And the problem of chronic kidney disease after solid organ transplantation, both kidney transplantation, but also heart and lung transplantation, are areas of particular expertise where we are really keen to actually do work with honours students on particular projects. My research interest in blue is as an epidemiologist. I'm actually interested in the health services research and using mixed methods to unpack the problem of equity of access and equity of outcomes. So my particular areas of research have historically been involved in Indigenous health as a non-Indigenous man coming into you today from Wurundjeri country, and with my experience over many years in the Northern Territory. And my areas of interest are equity of access to care and equity of outcomes, not only for kidney disease, but now branching out to hospital care in general. So those concerns relate to transplantation, not only kidney transplantation, treatment closer to home, and hospital care, not only for Indigenous Australians, but also for other so-called minority groups. A fact that you might not know is that a woman of the same age and same set of illnesses as a man has 15% less likely chance to get a kidney transplant than that man, for example. So there are equity problems right across our health system that have been thrown into sharp relief, not only nationally, but internationally, everywhere because of the COVID-19 epidemic, but existed long before. The sort of research that I do as an epidemiologist involves using data such as data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and I hope you all filled out your census documents last night because those are a very rich source for research in the health space. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, and more particularly some registry data with the dialysis and transplant registry, but also with linking that to other data sets. So I look forward to speaking to those of you who are interested in improving access to care for all Australians, and those of you who have a particular interest in one of the smartest organs in the body, the kidney, and how we can help the kidney work better in many aspects of subspecialised care. So next slide, I'll hand over to Professor Mark Shackleton.
Good evening, everyone. Great to see you out there and great for you to dial in. I hope you're all getting through this period okay and reaching out to support each other and getting the help that you need from your friends, family, and colleagues through the university. So my name's Mark Shackleton. I'm the Director of Oncology at the Alfred Hospital and also a Professor of Oncology and Laboratory Group Leader in the Central Clinical School at Monash Uni on the Alfred Precinct. Our clinical department is large and growing, particularly with the very dynamic clinical trials program that integrates well with a bunch of interesting translational research projects where we work directly with patient data and also samples taken directly from patients. On the laboratory side, our group comprises a whole range of research staff, excellent postdoc fellows, numerous PhD students, as well as honours and undergrad students. And our overall aim is to improve or the understanding of the development, progression and treatment, particularly of solid cancers. So you'll probably be aware that cancer generally is one of the biggest causes of morbidity and mortality in our community. And it's notable, in fact, more than 80% of cancers actually arise in what we call solid organs, breast, prostate, etc., etc. Our actual main disease of interest is a very deadly type of skin cancer called melanoma, but we actually study many other different types of cancers also, and are really more interested in fundamental mechanisms that cause cancer and cause cancers to progress that typically apply across the spectrum of malignant disease. We use a whole range of different types of laboratory techniques, from standard as well as advanced cell biology techniques, molecular biology, many omics platforms we also available that we also avail. And really, our philosophy is not to focus so much on becoming expert in one technique or another, but to try and identify those research questions which we think are the most important and that most urgently need addressing. And so our main areas of interest along that line are several at the moment. We've got particularly, I think, exciting projects in an area that's now become known as cancer heterogeneity. This is a feature, actually really key and previously underappreciated feature of many different types of cancers, which is the ability of cells within them to adapt and evolve and change over time, often in relatively diverse ways, despite the cells all being present within the same tumours. The phenomenon of cancer heterogeneity is arguably the biggest impediment to improving outcomes for patients affected by this disease. So just go back to the previous slide for a second. We've got other exciting programs in the super hot area of cancer epigenetics, which is the field where, apart from tumor immunology that I'll come into a moment, where many of the new and exciting cancer therapies are currently emerging, and also a really strong program in fundamental stem cell biology, trying to understand in great detail those specific mechanisms that enable normal cells to turn into malignant cells under the pressure of some sort of cancer-causing factor, ultimately towards developing better ways to prevent cancers forming in the first place, which we all agree is the most effective way to reduce the burden of this disease. Next slide, thanks.
Hi, Mark. I'll just have to skip ahead. We're running out of time for the webinar. So
No
I'll just note, if anyone wants to get in contact more with Mark or Miles, the other researcher, feel free to do so. So we'll just continue on, Shamil.
Thanks.
Our next speaker will be Professor Valanda Shikharthan. Take it away.
Thank you, Georgia. Can you hear me all right? Excellent. Look, I'm Valanda Shikharthan. I'm based at the Peninsula Clinical School, and some of you may not know that Peninsula Clinical School, based at Frankston Hospital, is actually a part of the Central Clinical School. And I'm really pleased to be here today to not sure if my video is starting. Anyway, if you can't see me, you can hear me, I hope. At the Peninsula Clinical School, I'm really pleased to show you the opportunities you might have to participate in research and actually carry through a successful honours project. So we have only clinically based research. We don't have any basic science work at Peninsula Clinical School, but we have a range of work across various disciplines, including medicine, surgery, epidemiology, and other fancy statistical kind of work which you might be able to do with good support. Next slide, please. If I can take you through some of the work that's available for students to think about, and these are the people that are associated with these pieces of research. You might meet them in the next chat room very soon. Jamie Leyland is a cardiologist who's working in the field of cardiac and coronary inflammation. He's published recently on a major trial that's shown that an older drug for gout. Colchicine is very useful in preventing further heart attacks, and he's on the lookout for students who'd be interested in pursuing this line of research. David Hunter-Smith and his plastic surgical team have very innovative techniques using 3D printing in reconstructive surgery, including breast surgery. So he's on the lookout for some interested people. We do have a range of work in epidemiology, and Nadine Andrew is conducting a huge amount of work in this area. She has a very large data set of more than 10,000 people who've had strokes, and we're looking at the quality of general practice care in such people. If you go to the field of bioinformatics and technology, Richard Beer, our bioinformatics lead, is using techniques such as phone-based work to measure physical activity for clinical trials. Michelle Calisaya, who's an applied therapist, physiotherapist as well, she has a very large cohort of children who've been followed up to midlife, and we're looking at the relationships between their fitness at young childhood to brain health at midlife. Ataya Collier, who's our biostatistician, is actually using bibliometric analysis, which is a way of trying to find out and synthesize the kinds of work that's being done across the world to identify some questions and answer questions. What is healthy aging, for example? How do you map the vast breadth of Australian COVID-related research that's being performed? So there's a number of pieces of work in clinical and applied research. I invite you to get in touch with me if you're interested. I look forward to seeing you in the chat room. I'd like to introduce Anne Holland, who's the Head of Respiratory Research at Alfred, for the next and last presentation.
Thanks very much, and thank you to all of you for hanging in there till the end of this part of the session tonight. And I won't keep you long before we can get to the chat room for some more discussion. So I am the Head of Respiratory Research at the Alfred and a Professor of Physiotherapy at the Central Clinical School. We collaborate very closely with respiratory medicine at the Alfred, which is one of the largest respiratory medicine services in the Southern Hemisphere. We have a very broad range of patient groups in who we have research expertise, including asthma and COPD, but also rarer diseases like pulmonary fibrosis, also lung cancer. And we have some statewide and specialist services, including cystic fibrosis. We have a particular interest in advanced lung disease, and we have a lung transplantation service, which is very active in research. We use a wide variety of different research methods. So we have laboratory-based research, but also a very large body of clinical research and clinical trials of new treatments, both drug and non-drug treatments. We have a range of epidemiology and registry-based studies. We also have very much a patient focus and are very keen to hear the patient voice in research in terms of their priorities and experiences. So we do quite a bit of qualitative research, and we also have expertise in implementation of research into practice. Next slide. So on the next slide, you'll see here just a few of the key opportunities we have this year for honours projects. Some of them are in my lab. I lead a research program which is particularly focused on non-drug treatments for people with respiratory disease and new models of care. We also have Associate Professor Natasha Smallwood, who is very interested in palliative care and symptom management, and Associate Professor Rob Sterling, who has expertise in lung cancer. So some of the projects that we have look at non-drug treatments such as oxygen and high flow, but also supportive care treatments such as singing and rehabilitation for people with chronic lung disease. We have a range of projects which are associated with the COVID pandemic. So one is around attitudes to ongoing public health measures amongst people with chronic lung disease, such as mask wearing, which can be very challenging for these patients. We have a body of work on the psychosocial effects of COVID-19 on frontline healthcare workers, which is led by Natasha Smallwood. And in the lung cancer space, we have studies on implementation of lung cancer screening, which is something new in Australia, and also on improving the quality of care through the Victorian Lung Cancer Registry. I'm very happy for you to contact me directly to discuss any of those projects, and would also be very happy to chat with you in the Q&A shortly. And I'll pass back to Georgia to end this part of the session.
Thanks, Anne, and thank you to everyone for attending. We hope that you can continue your discussions in the Q&A sessions that are beginning right now. So the links to those have been recopied in the chat. You also would have received an email this morning that should contain the links. So thank you again for everyone that's attended. And yeah, I'll just mention the honours applications are opening soon. So look at that. And yeah, thanks for everyone that's attended, and thanks to all the speakers and everyone that made this night possible. And hope to see you in the Q&As.